Good morning. Thanks for coming. My name is Vic McCunis. We're here to celebrate, remember, and honor our dear Brian Maughan. Marie asked me to do this, and I'm happy to do it. Brian, what a sweet, gentle soul. We're here to talk about him and think about him and remember him on this beautiful day, which I think he ordered. I looked at the forecast earlier this week, said it was going to rain. It's like, no, not with Brian's thing going on today. All this stuff going on, the statue thing. I heard something about a statue. Anyway, we've got a whole list of people that we're going to bring up to talk to you. And Brian was born on February 14th, 1942. I used to like to call him on the phone and wish him a happy Valentine's Day. And we lost him on August 6th, 2020. And so we finally have an opportunity here with all the stuff that's been going on to get together and do this thing. So without further ado, Kathy Seidel, who's a close friend of Brian and Marie's. Kathy, are you here? Why don't you come on up?
Good morning. I'm Katie Seidel, and I'm going to read two short poems. Is it okay with the microphone? Okay. Brian was very fond of poetry, and especially of the two poets, William Butler Yeats and Robert Graves. So these two poems are by those two poets. And the first one probably spoke to his Irish soul, although he was such a city lover when he lived in New York City. He always had, according to Marie, he had this longing for the wild and natural places, and so this poem speaks to that. And a few years ago when they were invited to a Thanksgiving gathering and they were supposed to bring poetry to share, he brought this one. It's called The Lake Isle of Innisfree, written in 1890. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin built there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement gray, I hear it in the deep heart's core. The next one is really short, and it's one that Brian loved to read to Marie. It's called The Leap. Forget the rest. My heart is true, and in its waking thought of you, gives the same wild and sudden leap that jerks it from the brink of sleep. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. He was a poetic soul. And if he saw me dressed like this, he saw me one time wearing a suit, and I was downtown, and he broke into the Irish brogue and started teasing me relentlessly, and that was so much fun. He had such a wit. Up next, we're going to hear from Brian's son, Anthony Maughan.
Thank you, Dick. Thank you, everybody who came out here today from far and wide. And thanks on behalf of Marie especially. And I want to thank the whole community of Yellow Springs for everything of the outpouring of love and support that was given to my dad, especially through the last 5 years of his life as he dealt with some sickness and decline. And then after his passing, there's just such an outpouring again of love and support from the community, especially for Marie, and just how much she was surrounded by love. So thank you so much from the family and from Marie for all of that. Marie told me a couple days ago that Brian never wrote down anything before giving a speech, so I'm giving a wing at it. I did write a couple things down. Very little though, right? My dad liked to tell a lot of jokes, as a lot of you probably know, and something of a quirky sort of sense of humor. I'd like to make people laugh. I think he really enjoyed. I think the reason he did it was that it was wonderful to him to see somebody break into hysterics if he could get them to do it. But he wasn't needing of getting the laugh or needing to tell a joke, because if you didn't get one of his jokes, or if you didn't get it twice, he would stop telling you jokes. So anyway, I just love this idea that there's some people out there who think of my dad as sort of a humorless, a very literal-minded person. Anyway, one of several observations I'm going to make here. I'm not sure what my dad would think about all of us gathering here to celebrate him. I think he would be somewhat confused by it. I don't think he would be he wouldn't say, oh, don't do this, or why are you doing this? He would not quite get it. And one of my earliest memories of this part of him was at his 50th birthday party, which a number of his friends threw a surprise birthday party for him. There were about 20 people there. And when he got there, or being told that he was going to a dinner party with 2 other people, everybody said, happy birthday, Brian. And 2 or 3 hours into the party, he still didn't realize it was his birthday party. And people had to sort of keep explaining to him that it was this is your 50th birthday party. And he would say, well, how do you guys know each other? And I know all these people here. But he really thought there was something sort of magical about this very low level of self-awareness that he had. And it wasn't that he was obviously naive or anything, but he just couldn't ever put himself first, or he never really sort of thought about his ego or what was building it up or what was taking it down. So that was sort of an amazing thing about him. And I think probably most of you know a little bit what I'm talking about, but I don't know how to describe it much better than that. I wanted to tell this, I don't know if it's even an anecdote, but my dad really liked a good lunch and a good deal, and when we lived in New York, he found a deli nearby that had a $2 fish sandwich. It was fried fish. It was 8 inches long. It was one of those little bodega marts, and it was $1.99. I'm pretty sure he ate that fish sandwich for 8 years every day for lunch, with mayonnaise and hot sauce and fish and lettuce, tomato. And he got to know the owner of the store, and he knew all the owner's 5 kids, even though he hadn't ever met them. He knew all of their names and where they were going to school, what stage they were at. He'd go in and talk to them every day. But that was always, made me think of my dad, is that he wasn't somebody who needed a lot of variety in his lunch, but he was really concerned with other people and really wanted to get to know other people. And that's that about the sandwich. I wanted to say a little bit about sort of adding on to that sort of sense of sort of low self-awareness of the sorts that he had in regards to art, because I think it was particularly inspiring to me, because his love of art in the world was never about what it said about him, or what it said in a sort of social way, or should you like art or should you not like art. Art was just this thing that existed, and that anybody could, even if you started out in Canadian, rural Canada, where there was probably not a whole lot of art around, you could find places in the world where you could fill your life with art and fill your life with people who love art. And there was no reason that you had to do that, but there should be no reason that you wouldn't do it. So if there was a lesson that he taught other than just his sort of kindness, I would hope that that's one that everybody here could sort of take away, is that when you're thinking about art and enjoying art, just don't think about what it means too much. I mean, sometimes it's about what the art means, but what it means about you. Just look at the art. Brian, want to talk about, just briefly, because I don't want to get everybody, or particularly Marie, crying too much, but had a wonderful quarter-century relationship, loving relationship with Marie, and it was wonderful to see them when they first fell in love, when I was a teenager, looking like teenagers and acting like teenagers, and then see as their relationship went over years that they got less and less mature, so that then that they were more like 10-year-olds or something as it went on, at the smooching and their notes being left all over the place constantly. But yeah, my dad just really got so much from you, and thank you. Since the past year, since my dad passed, I've been thinking a lot about, or I've been, I guess, reminiscing about him, and thinking about, you know, in the first few weeks after he died, just, you know, obviously the last days were sort of stuck in my mind, but, you know, now that it's been a year, I'm thinking back and I'm remembering all sorts of things throughout his whole life, and sort of seeing him in a much more sort of complete sense, but remembering a lot of specific memories, and wishing so much that he was here again, because I was like, oh, well, we never went back and talked about those things. I want to, like, reminisce with you, and I want to ask you about things that I remember from my life, and then, you know, I never really did much of a job, or a good job, if that's what it should be, asking him about his life before I was born, before I knew him. And it occurred to me, though, that, you know, that's sort of a way that I want him to be back. And if he was back, though, there wouldn't be reminiscing. You know, that wasn't something that ever, you know, if ever would happen. There would be sort of be like, well, there's something to do right now. You know, maybe there's a memory to be made this evening. But of course, it's not. The point isn't making the memory. It's just sort of being in the moment. And my dad always just wanted to go out and meet some people, and maybe we could talk each other into staying out a little longer, and then again a little later, a little longer than that. And just get to know, you know, people around him is really what he wanted to do, and he never thought much about his past, I don't think, or wanted to talk that much about it. So anyway, that's some other thing. These are all sort of a list of things that I love about my dad, and that's one of the big ones, is just that he sort of taught me how to keep trying to enjoy yourself and use other people. Get a lot of joy out of life by using other people. Yeah, that's the end of my remarks. So thanks again for everybody for being here.
I love that, Anthony. I love that. I think we all loved it. Huh? See, I knew a totally different guy than you knew. I mean, totally different guy. Of course, you're his son, so there's no way I know anything like that stuff. But I got to know him in a totally different way, and I'll try to talk about that later without crying. Anyway, I understand, according to my notes here, that we have Lee Turan here, who's going to be reading for Bert Gildart, a close friend of Brian's from Glacier Park.
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. My husband, David Bristol, and Bert Gildorf and Brian Maughan all met as teenagers or young college students in Glacier National Park, where they were on a labor crew together, and that continued for many years. So Bert would really have loved to be here. Thank you. Bert would love to be here, but he wrote this letter and asked if we could read it to you. Through the years, I've developed friends who, because of similar interests and beliefs, have become lifelong friends, meaning I would do anything in my power to prolong their significance, not just to me, but in Brian's case, to the whole community. Another such person is David Bristol. He and his wife offered to read for me my thoughts about Brian. Unfortunately, the aches and pains of advancing age deter me from traveling from Montana to Yellow Springs. I met Brian Maughan in June 1961 in Glacier National Park. He's the first person I encountered after leaving Washington, D.C. on a Greyhound bus bound for Montana. Though only 19 years old, Brian was foreman on a labor crew, and part of his job was to greet new employees and help them settle into one of the park's tent camps. Brian was a college football player who soon discovered football was not his calling. Dropped out of college, he hitchhiked around Europe for 2 years. And I, as an Army brat, had lived in Europe, so we found common ground quickly to talk about our European adventures. The night of my arrival, and many nights that summer, Brian and I got acquainted at the local pub in West Glacier. Frida was the bartender, and appropriately the place was named Frida's. She was possessive of her bar, and any rowdiness went outside. And if you made a mess of your drinking, you cleaned it up. So I asked for a beer. She demanded proof of my age, and I wasn't yet 21, so I had to leave. But a few minutes later, Brian, younger than I, walked out with 2 beers, and we sat and drank. Through the summer, I witnessed that Brian, even when he was not part of the mess making, would always stay after the pub closed, and he would help Frida clean up. Later that summer of my arrival, after spending much of the night at Frida's, Brian and I walked the dirt trail back to our tent camp, wondering what the future held. Glacier and that park's incredible beauty were certainly becoming an influence. And so we returned summer after summer. Then in the mid-60s, Brian told us that he was enrolling in San Francisco Art Institute. He became committed to his life's work as an artist, and he didn't leave San Francisco until he earned his master's degree. And so the years went by, and periodically we checked in, often in Montana, where I eventually settled. I visited Long Island, New York, where I found Brian working as a carpenter to support his growing family and his art. Even when years separated us, our reunions picked right up where we had left off. Brian was unwavering in what he had to offer as a friend and as a human being. It was one of his most enduring qualities. Like many artists, Brian had periods of struggle, but his art is now spread far and wide. The heroic-sized bronze of Pegasus once stood in the Savannah Harbor in Georgia. Brian was commissioned to surround Milwaukee Brewers Station with life-size bronzes of Hank Aaron, Robin Yount, Bob Uecker, and Bud Selig. For his own collection, Rosalind and Jimmy Carter bought Brian's piece called Northwind. It's the bust of a Native American warrior. The lifelike expression on the warrior's face in Northwind and the work's subtle association with the radiance of nature exemplifies Brian's dedication and his attention to detail. And now his last work, the statue of Wheeling Gaunt, will stand in Yellow Springs Park. Sadly, Brian passed before his vision was completed, and before he and Anthony Maughan, his son, could celebrate the unveiling together. And how I wish my wife Janie and I could join those assembled here today and admire in person this, the last of our wonderful friend's great vision. Brian's passing is an enormous loss. We offer our love and condolences to his community, his wife Marie, his sons Brooke and Anthony, his grandson Marlon, and also to all who loved him and experienced his love.
Really good to hear his dear friend's thoughts from the teenage years. And I can see how Brian could be smooth and get those 2 beers. Even though he's underage, I can see how he worked that. He probably broke into a little bit of the Irish brogue, like he would do, right? He would do that. Speaking of David Bristol, I understand David Bristol, close friend from those days, is here and willing to share with us. Welcome.
Welcome, everybody. It's wonderful to see your faces. I know all of you love Brian, and I just have a few words I would like to share, mainly about our friendship and what bonded our friendship. We met in Glacier National Park in 1963. One thing nice about Glacier Park and the young people that worked there, we automatically had a huge thing in common. We loved the outdoors and we loved nature, and so it was a seed for all of us, and it ended up that a lot of us loved books and poetry and reading, and we would talk about those things even in our youth. At night, we hiked many of the trails together with friends in Glacier National Park. At night, we went to Frida's bar or Peter Pence's pizza parlor, where it was easier to talk about our thoughts and the books we had been reading. At least until the music started, then we danced. And all of you know how Brian loved to dance. Every time I visit him, one thing we had to do was make y'all's Friday night dance. And it was wonderful to see Marie and Brian dancing together. Their joy. I mean, it was just pure joy. And only recently did I learn that at the age of 18, I learned it from Brooke Maughan's wonderful obituary, that at the age of 18, he taught himself to read. Brian and I both read slowly. We learned that when they gave it a name, we both had dyslexia. And Brian had, when he fused, I think he got punished more than I did for his dyslexia. They didn't call it, they didn't have a word for it. Then you were slow or even stupid. But I think this affected Brian. I think it made him sensitive to how other people were feeling. Brian and I both read slowly, but we kept turning the pages and often were exuberant about what we read. Time passed and Brian pursued his interest in art and philosophy. At Columbia University, he studied philosophy for a year. Even when he left Columbia University, he continued to be an avid reader and observer of philosophy and philosophers, Greek, European, Native American, and Eastern. I love philosophy also, but my education had been limited by the sciences. Brian became my mentor to my own passions that moved me. Just to name a few of the philosophers and writers that Brian directed me into. Bertrand Russell, his favorite philosopher, a quote, "To fear love is to fear life, and those who fear life are already 3 parts dead." Carl Jung, who along with Joseph Campbell opened up the great archetypes. of mythology, including the archetypes found in Native American myths, which played an important role, and Brian did a whole series of Native American statues. And they're wonderful, and I hope that there's a place where y'all can view those. Blackout speaks. Quote from Blackout. Grown men may learn from very little children, for the hearts of little children are pure, and therefore the Great Spirit may show to them things which older people miss. Alfred North Whitehead, who Brian considered one of the most humane philosophers, despite him being a prominent mathematician. A quote, art attracts us only by what it reveals of our most secret self. And when I would visit Brian here in Yellow Springs, I would often find him walking around reading from Dogen Zenji, a 2nd century Zen master. I still haven't studied Dogen, but I hope to. Quotes, when we discover that the truth is already in us, we are all at once our original selves. I want to speak a little bit to Brian's kindness, which touched everybody here, I'm sure. His kindness was on display for me, not he displayed anything. He was totally selfless. But when I was in New York City, going to Columbia University, attending a writing workshop, and Brian and Marilyn and Brooke lived there at that time also. So, but Brian and I, the streets in New York, as you know, are very busy, very heavily laden with pedestrians and crosswalks, and you're always dodging around people. But Brian would notice things that actually would make me kind of feel bad. I was in the city, pedestrian traffic was heavy, fertile grounds for Brian's kindness. His kindness was never on display. It was selfless. It flowed naturally from him like breathing. And when I would catch him lifting someone's burden at a crosswalk, I began to question myself. My God, I would think, why didn't I see the elderly woman loaded down with groceries crossing the street? And then the last words I ever heard Brian speak, and I think it speaks to his kindness and to his philosophy and to certainly his love of all people. He had a severe stroke, and Marie was FaceTiming beside his hospital bed. She asked Brian, who was on IV fluids and had a tube coming from his nostril, if he would like to say something to those who loved him. Yes, he said, sitting up in bed, I love you. And really emphasize that again by saying, I love all of you.
Thank you, Lee and David. Now we've come to the part in your invisible program that is blank, because it's my part. Marie hoped that I'd say something. Be careful what you ask for. Anyway, I got to know Brian in a kind of a cool way. Brian made a bust of me. So I got to sit with Brian. And Brian treated me like I was some kind of celebrity because I do a radio show here in town, and I interview authors, and he listened to the show, and he was in awe of me, or so he claimed. So sweet. And I would turn around and go, come on, man. You have met like some of the greatest baseball stars in the world and done sculptures of them. I am nobody. I want to talk about that. And we would take turns trying to interview each other. And I'm used to being the guy doing the interview. And he was good. He would get me to talk, and I kept trying to turn it around. No, we're going to talk about you, Brian. No, we're talking about you. And we're sitting there. And meanwhile, he's making my face and my head and my hair and my expression and my musculature and my face. I'm watching this, trying not to look at it because it was so incredible. It looked just like me. I mean, it was freaky. He would leave the room, and I'd just staring at it like, oh my God, how'd he do that? The clay, how's he do that? And he would look at me. He would peer at me like he was looking inside me. You know, he had those eyes. He'd stand there and he'd just look at me. And then we would talk some more. And it was hard, but I got him to reminisce. It was tough. He didn't want to talk about his childhood very much. The football thing, barely talked about it. Talked about Glacier Park. Loved talking about San Francisco. I think he said he met Janis Joplin at a party. He had these adventures in Europe. He had this wild life in Europe. He loved talking about New York. He loved Yellow Springs. But I had to work him. I had to work him very carefully, because he'd always turn it back around. So let's talk about you. No, let's talk about you. And we're sitting there for an hour, and he's looking inside me. And it was so beautiful. And I know what you mean about lunch. He liked lunch. And just what a magical man he was. So gentle. I was really careful not to say stuff to him that admitted what a brutal world we live in. I mean, he would look like I'd shot him with an arrow. You know, he wanted to talk about the goodness in us. He wanted to talk about the good things in life. He didn't want to dwell on the pain, the unpleasantness. And that was great, because it's too easy to do. We get caught up in this warp where we're always thinking about all the horrible things, the terrible things. We don't think about the goodness in our hearts as much as we could, or we should, or we might. And what a man, what a guy, and his love for Marie. And you know what really did it for me? I'm a cat guy, okay? He told me about this cat, how he got his cat. And I just, Dan, don't you be frowning at me. He told me about this cat and how he fell in love with this cat. And I'm just like, oh man, you got me. This cat, I mean, he just loved that cat so much. And how that cat came to him. Well, if you're a cat person, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not, sorry to be talking about cats, but he loved them. He loved the world. He loved being here. He loved his friends. He loved Yellow Springs. I'll spare you the rest. We've got Alex Maughan now, who is Brian's nephew.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's a real honor to be here. I have a reading that the transition from what Vic just said is, well, and what everyone's been saying is perfect. And it's an honor to do this reading because both Brian and my father, David, possessed that same kindness. They were both just the most kind to their core, and all the stuff about how they saw the world or just lived it is what this reading is about. This is from Thich Nhat Hanh, the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. Each of us must ask ourselves, how large is my heart? Pardon me. This book could be smaller, I think. How can I help my heart grow, bigger and bigger every day? The practice of inclusiveness is based on the practice of understanding, compassion, and love. When you practice looking deeply to understanding suffering, the nectar of compassion will arise naturally in your heart. Maitri, loving kindness, and karuna, compassion, can continue to grow indefinitely. So thanks to the practice of looking deeply and understanding, your loving kindness and compassion grow day by day. And with enough understanding and love, you can embrace and accept everything and everyone. Very often in a conflict, we feel that if those on the other side, those who oppose us or believe differently from us, cease to exist, then we would have peace and happiness. So we may be motivated by the desire to annihilate, to destroy the other side, to remove certain people from our community or society. But looking deeply, we will see that just as we have suffered, they have also suffered. If we truly want to live in peace, safety, and security, we must create. There's more, it's not a period. We must create an opportunity for those of us on the other side to live this way as well. If we know how to allow the other side into our heart, if we have that intention, we not only suffer less right away, but we also increase our own chances of having peace and security. When we're motivated by the intention to practice inclusiveness, it becomes very easy to ask, how can we best help you so that you can enjoy safety? Please tell us. We express our concern for their safety, their need to live in peace, to rebuild their country, to strengthen their society. When you are able to approach a situation of conflict in this way, it can help transform the situation very quickly. The basis for this transformation, the first thing that must happen, is the change within your own heart. You open your heart to include the other side. You want to give them the opportunity to live in peace as you wish to live. Thank you, everybody.
I remember some years ago that Brian gave this incredible, unforgettable talk at the Yellow Springs Brewery presentation. If you were there, I think you know what I'm talking about. Richard, I know you were there. Just incredible. His journey to become a sculptor is amazing. That's one thing when I posed for him, he talked about how he started off doing something really different. You know, working with textiles and design and stuff, and just how he became a sculptor, it's incredible. And you look at these sculptures he did, and the one that really I love to talk to him about was the one of Bob Uecker sitting in the chair, clear up in the nosebleed seats in the stadium in Milwaukee. What an amazing thing. Have you ever seen that sculpture? Bob Uecker? I mean, whoa. I would have loved to have been fly on the wall and listen to those two talk, what they were talking about. Okay, now we've got Brooke Maughan, Brian's other son.
Hey, so first I'd just like to repeat a couple things my brother said. One, thank you all very much for being here and for collectively being such a great community for my father to retire and live his last years in. And Marie especially, of course. Love you. And thanks to everybody who traveled some distance to be here too, David. My first memory of my father, I think, was being 3 years old and riding on his bike with him. I don't know if I was standing in the basket on the handlebars, or I can't remember the details, but we came to a red light, and I understood that red meant you had to stop and green meant you could go. And I didn't know that it was legal to take a right-hand turn on a red light in New York State at the age of 3. So he pretended that we were breaking the law by taking that right-hand turn, and that has stuck in my mind for the last 45 years, because there's probably nothing better than being in cahoots with your dad and getting away with stuff, which is a fundamental human psychological need, I think. And I also want to repeat, I guess, or elaborate on a couple other things my brother said, because he's right on. And my father, I think, was an extraordinary person, and I think he was almost utterly devoid of certain things, pretentiousness and egoism, and but it wasn't an accidental thing. It was the product of years of studying the best of Western philosophy, and he, I think, passed that on to me, and an appreciation of our Enlightenment values, and Bertrand Russell and Jung, and I think the same thing was true of the sculpture too. Though it's not, there's some talent involved, but also years and years of studying the human anatomy and knowing where all the muscles are and all that. But he was a fantastic person, and I don't really know what else to say beyond that. But I think that he worked consciously on being who he was. It wasn't an accident, and I like to think that he passed some of that on to me, and other people too. And thank you again for coming. I may be up for one more poem, I'm not sure, or one more. Get the author herself. Better.
I did have the privilege of being with Brian for 26 years. I guess it's been 27 now, because it's been gone a year and 2 months. I changed a lot. He helped me lose at least part of the need to have things just properly so and perfect, and to enjoy the day as it was and meet people where they were. I am so grateful for that. I wrote a poem for him right after he died, and I put in everything that I was feeling at that time, and that was a resume of our 26 years together. I feel that I was so loved by him that something in me was complete, largely due to that love and being, he was considerate of me. The reason we moved to Yellow Springs was because I wanted a full-time job teaching. It was a tenure-track position. In New York City, I didn't have a tenure-track position. And he said he would be willing to come to my job in Ohio. So I was grateful for him to do that, and I regretted that often in the first 5 years, because he was hard to transplant. He had deep roots, and when we pulled those roots out of New York City, it took him 5 to 10 years to transplant. So thanks to all of you for helping water his taproot and get it growing again, and give him what he needed to be happy and thrive here in Yellow Springs. So the title of the poem is From One Who Is Loved to One Who Is Loved, for Brian. I who am here, enshrouded in your cloak of grace, and wrapped in words of comfort from those who knew and loved you, rest my weary heart. You fly free and joyous, grace-filled arc of eternal love, expanding skyward. Clouds write our names. We dance,
form and formlessness intertwine. This, our song of love, ripples through hearts, earth, water, fire, and sky, never ending.
We're going to have a message of love from Brian, but first let's take a moment for some silent meditation.
Pretty miracle things when you've had a stroke and
Conglomeration.
yeah, conglomeration is right. Yeah. So, Brian, would you like to say anything to the people you love?
I'd like to say I love you, and I have good reason for love.
Yes, so true. And I can say that we love you, and we have good reason to love you.
Good to hear his voice. Thank you. For those of you from Yellow Springs, you know this is the part that we all love, even more than anything in the world. It's talking about people we love, and this is our opportunity now. If someone wants to come up and talk about Brian or whatever you feel, okay? So who would like to come up? Don't all rush me.
I'm not from Yellow Springs. I'm from Florida, and I'm Marie's sister, Kathy. So I met Brian through Marie, of course. And what I remember about the first time I met him was that he had at least 3 long dreadlocks. And they were pulled back into, so as I was saying, he had at least 3 long dreadlocks down to his waist, I believe, and they were pulled back in a ponytail. And it just, it just really, he looked like an artist. He was a very gifted artist and sculptor, and so I remember as time went on, I think that hairdo changed, and I remember when he cut it all off, and I think Marie said, "Oh, I'm so glad it's gone."
I loved his hair. But the Village Voice got a photograph of him from the back, and his dreads were tucked into his belt. and the title of the photo was "Worst Dresser of the Year." But the only reason that I was glad they were gone is because they had gotten so long, and during the night he had lots of dreams where he moved around a lot. And he would flip his hair, and I would get hit in the face or like hit over the body with those dreadlocks. So anyway, but I did love them.
Well, I'm glad you cleared that up. 'Cause I thought you just wanted him to look more normal, Okay. I love his dreadlocks too. I thought it was really, it just made him who he is. And one thing I remember, I felt when I was around Brian is that he was a very calm person, very laid back, very go with the flow. And I remember one time we were in Sarasota walking on the beach, and Marie and I tend to walk fast. We're fast walkers. And we were all walking along, everybody, as well as the rest of my family that was there. And I remember looking back, and Brian was like so far back, and we're like, oh my goodness, we need to stop and wait for Brian. So he didn't want to rush through life. He liked to take his time. He was probably looking at the water, looking at the people as we were walking along, and so Brian, being a fellow Aquarian, he and I are both Aquarius. I just felt this affinity with him. I just really liked that he was an Aquarius. And when they would come and visit us, something that Anthony said really reminded me of a story. I think was it 3 years ago, Marie, that you were in Punta Gorda visiting us? Something like around 3 years ago. And so he was mostly recovered from his illness, the cancer that he was dealing with. And we went to a restaurant, and Brian, he got, like, I think it was a seafood dish, and he just loved it. It was so, so good, but he said he ate like a quarter of it, and he said, well, I have 3 more meals left of this. And I was thinking, wow, I probably would have eaten it all at once, or at least half of it, but Brian knew how to just savor, take his time with it, and then eat it another 3 times. So, anyway, I love Brian too. I wasn't around Brian very much, but Brian and Marie together, I loved them together. I just thought they were a great couple, and so I enjoyed visiting them and them visiting us in Florida.
Thank you. Do we have a queue forming over here, or? Yes. Who's next?
Hi. I have known Brian since, help me Marie, 1980, something like that. So, living in Charlottesville, Marie and I became really good friends, and I was there during a couple of her heartaches when I didn't feel she was really appreciated by the various, not many. I'm saying various for one. It was Marie's 40th birthday, and as usual, she had a ton of friends. And we all got together and put money into a fund, and we made her a big poster, and it said she could choose between a hot air balloon ride, African dancing lessons, which I was sure she was going to take, or sculpture lessons. And she chose the sculpture lessons, and she took the lessons from Brian. And surely after maybe a few months, we started to see a change in Marie, happier, giddy, clearly in love. We met Brian. We got to see his studio, which in Charlottesville was just fabulous. It was just covered with artwork and drawings, and he had a cat, Picasso. Yeah, Picasso, who lived there, and it was just clearly that the two of them just got along so well. Marie was happy, secure, in love. Brian was warm, and life was good. And so Marie and I separated, went our different ways. Marie to New York City, me to Arkansas for a few years prior to coming to Ohio. And when she got the job at Wright State, she wanted to live in Oakwood because that's where we live. And Brian came and just hated everything about Oakwood. And I had said to Marie in the beginning, I see Brian in Yellow Springs, I really do. She was like, but I don't want to be far from you. So they were trying out Oakwood. They stayed in our house while we were gone, looked after our dog, and Brian was like, I'm not moving to Ohio, I'm not moving here. And I'm like, just try Yellow Springs. And sure enough, he came to Yellow Springs, and these were his people. This was where he belonged, and moving to Ohio became a thing. It became a possibility because he could have his mini New York here, and it did take a while. I remember it took him a while. I felt guilty at times, having, almost felt like I'd strong-armed him also, but in the end, he became a fixture, a part of not Oakwood, Yellow Springs and really started to make friends and as Marie says, roots, and just started to really enjoy his life on his bicycle. So my memory of Brian is someone who was true to himself. He knew where he couldn't live. And also someone with a great sense of humor who was always loving. No matter what, he always showed love. And we wouldn't always see each other. Life was busy, and it doesn't seem that Oakwood's that far away, but that 35-minute drive sometimes can be. And whenever you saw him, you were enveloped in his love, and it never faded. So yeah, we all miss him. He went through a lot at the end of his life, and he was courageous, and Marie was incredible as his partner. And one of the things I'll always be grateful for was that Marie decided to retire and was able to spend an entire year with him, enjoying him, traveling with him. And I just can't get over what a fantastic decision that was. So yeah, anyway, I loved him.
So good to hear all these things about Brian. Who's next? Brian, it's Brian. Brian.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is part of what I want to talk about.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, Vic. Good morning, everyone. So, walking down today, I was reminded that I had the privilege to meet Brian around this time of year, 8 years ago, with the Sculpture Bronze Symposium. And I was at that time working for the Yellow Springs Arts Council, and I was promoting this symposium, which was a huge thing for our village. So I got to spend a lot of time talking with Brian, seeing him work, sharing things, sharing photos, and I would encourage anyone after this to walk by the Mills Park Hotel and enjoy his sculptures today. I think it's a great honor to have them in the village. But, you know, Vic mentioning another Brian, one of the things that inevitably happened is the Bryans would all meet up often at Peaches during open mic night. And it was Brian Maughan, Brian Upchurch, Brian Fisher, and myself. So there are a lot of photos where you also often saw the Bryans, beers in hand, having a great time. And I think that's the last thing I want to say is that, you know, through these 8 years, 7 years that I got to spend time with Brian in different ways, one of the things that was always so great was whenever you saw him, you just felt happy. He had that great smile, you felt welcomed, and that doesn't always happen these days. So I really miss him, and take care, Marie.
Her heart deeply, and she's a different person because of him. So I will tell you what those 5 hours were. After Brian was ill, Bob and Katie gave Brian violin lessons as a birthday gift, I think, from Shirley, because he played a viola when he was a kid. The only reason he quit playing viola was because his parents, trying to save money, had bought him a used case, and it was blue and black spots. And he was so ashamed of carrying that blue and black spotted viola case that he quit playing. So anyway, Bob and Katie's violin was not blue and didn't have a blue and black case. It was just a black case, so he was fine. But he went for lessons with Shirley. And the second lesson, he came home, and I was like, "How did you do?" And he was like, "Well, let me play you what what I'm learning." So he played, a shaky tune. And I was like, "Wow, that's amazing." And he was like, "Yeah, Shirley said I play really well. Like, I've had 3 lessons instead of 2.
Alan?
I wanted to come up and share something that I shared with Brian, and interestingly, it's not completely different from what Brian House does. Brian House and Brian Maughan shared the same name. According to Brian, he and I shared the same appearance. So he would go through town and people would say, hello, Brian. He'd say, no, I'm not Brian. I'm the physicist. There's more, but I think that's, you know. He also pretended I was his older brother at times. And I'm 67. I'm not even 66. Yes?
My name is Sunny, and when I was pretty young, Brian used to give me lessons on how to work with clay and how to make art that way. While my memory of them is fading a bit, I do remember how he really helped me out during that period. Because, you know, I was going through some stuff mentally, mental health-wise, and I wrote a poem to, you know, just sort of commemorate all of this. So, you know, if any of you saw me just tapping on my phone while some people were talking, it's not because I was texting my friends or anything, it's because I was writing this. Okay. Gentle earthen waves, crashing on an invisible shore, the scent of clay, your aroma, that permeates in every crack of me, your eyes, that memory fades, but you never will, as vibrant as a Technicolor clay bowl, like the folding canyons of the American Southwest. You remain etched in time, rivers carrying your sediments, cutting deeper, your life molded from clay.
Thank you. Yeah, when you talk, if you could stand up here so Patty can preserve your vision forever. That's good. Anyone else? I'm sorry I didn't see Shirley earlier. She was waving her hand. I guess I didn't notice. So, who else is interested in speaking? Yes.
Just a real quick one. I'm a neighbor, Alex, and I really always appreciate Brian and just in the small ways that you know a neighbor, but knowing him closer and closer as he lived next door, he just really made me think that the measure of a person is a sense of humor, and if you can keep it till the end, then you've really done it right. And I remember even in some of those FaceTime chats from the hospital, Marie would say something like, "Okay, say goodbye, Brian." And he said, "Bye, Brian." So, right up until the end. That's how to do it right.
And we're all trying to say goodbye, aren't we? Bye, Brian. Anyone else?
Quick announcement, we've set out a number of Brian's drawings on the back table over here, and we're encouraging anybody, especially anybody who doesn't have any of his work yet, to please take a drawing home with them if they promise to take good care of it and appreciate it. So anyway, any of those drawings though on the back table there to be taken. Thanks. Oh yes, and if you haven't heard, there's a sculpture unveiling just up the hill today. Well, I'll be making a few remarks about the sculpture there, so you'll have to, if you want to hear more about it, you'll have to come there. Thanks.
It's easy to forget the big stuff.
Yeah, that's at 1:30.
1:30, sculpture unveiling, right over here, there, right over there. Okay. Anyone else? Seems like we're kind of maybe drawing to a conclusion here. Am I just drawing a conclusion, or are we actually doing it? Anyone? Think we're good? Marie?